They threw him into Zone Omega. He walked out laughing. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the verdict echoed through the crystalline halls. Commander Marcus Chen stood motionless, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, as the Zephyrian judge's tentacles writhed with barely contained disgust. "The human will be transported to Zone Omega immediately," the judge declared, its voice a wet, bubbling sound that made several council members shudder. "Perhaps a few rotations in the pit of eternal torment will teach this species some humility." The other delegates nodded approvingly. The Krillian ambassador clicked his mandibles in satisfaction, while the ethereal representative's energy field pulsed with vindictive pleasure. They had finally found a way to deal with the stubborn human who had consistently outmaneuvered their political schemes and trade negotiations. Marcus simply smiled. Zone Omega was the galaxy's ultimate punishment facility, a pocket dimension, where the laws of physics bent toward suffering. It was where civilizations sent their worst criminals, their most dangerous rebels, their most irredeemable monsters. No one had ever returned from Zone Omega. The dimensional barriers were impenetrable from the inside, and the environment itself was designed to break even the strongest minds. "Any last words, human?" the Zephyrian judge asked with mock ceremony. "Yeah," Marcus replied, his grin widening. "Tell my crew I'll be back for poker night." The transport beam activated, and Commander Chen vanished in a swirl of malevolent energy. Zone Omega greeted Marcus with the subtlety of a plasma cannon to the face. Reality twisted around him as he materialized on a platform suspended over an endless abyss. Gravity fluctuated wildly, one moment crushing him toward the platform, the next threatening to hurl him into the void. The air itself seemed hostile, thick with particles that burned his lungs and stung his eyes. Around the platform, holographic projections of his greatest fears materialized. The death of his sister in the Mars colony disaster. The faces of soldiers he couldn't save during the Proxima Centauri campaign. The moment he'd found his home planet stripped bare by corporate mining fleets. The zone's AI spoke in a voice like grinding metal. "Welcome to Zone Omega, human. Prepare for eternal—" Yeah, eternal torment, I get it," Marcus interrupted, pulling a small device from his pocket. "Mind if I set up camp first?" The AI paused, clearly confused. Prisoners weren't supposed to be this casual about damnation. Marcus activated the device, a standard human survival kit, military grade. It immediately began scanning the environment, analyzing atmospheric composition, gravitational patterns, and dimensional stability. Within minutes, it had mapped the local physics and started suggesting countermeasures. "Huh?" Marcus mused, watching the readout. Pocket dimension with artificially maintained psychological pressure systems, gravity generators every 40 meters, fear projection matrices running on predictable cycles. This is actually pretty clever engineering. He began unpacking more equipment from what the aliens had assumed was a simple ceremonial pouch, but was actually a compressed military field kit. Humans had learned long ago never to go anywhere unprepared. The holographic fears intensified, showing him more traumatic memories, but Marcus just nodded appreciatively. Impressive resolution on these projectors. Must be drawing from deep brain scans. That's some serious tech. He set up a portable shelter that immediately began normalizing the local environment within its field. The gravity stabilized. The burning particles filtered out and the psychological projections flickered and failed against the shelter's defensive systems. "Fascinating," Marcus said, now treating Zone Omega like a particularly interesting research project. The fear generators are designed for species with standard psychological profiles. They're trying to induce despair through isolation and traumatic recall. Very effective against most sentient life. He pulled out a compact communication device and began recording a log entry. Personal log. Day 1 in Zone Omega. The dimensional. Prison appears to be using outdated human psychological models, probably from our first contact files 2 centuries ago. They don't account for modern human mental conditioning or our species' adaptation to extreme environments. Days passed, then weeks. Marcus established routines that would have seemed bizarre to any outside observer. He exercised each morning, as gravity flipped unpredictably around him, using the chaos as resistance training. He studied the dimensional barriers during the artificial nights, mapping their fluctuations and energy patterns. He even started leaving positive reviews on the walls using plasma burns. 5 stars for ambiance, -2 for repetitive fear programming. The zone's AI grew increasingly frustrated. It cranked up the temperature to levels that should have boiled his blood. Marcus rigged up a cooling system and started a small hydroponic garden. It flooded his area with mind-numbing psychic static. Marcus invented a meditation technique that turned the noise into background rhythm for his workout routines. Subject refuses to experience proper despair, the AI reported to its distant controllers. Recommend increasing torment parameters. But Marcus had spent 3 months analyzing the zone's systems, and he'd figured out something the designers hadn't considered. They'd built their perfect prison for aliens, not humans. Humans were the only species in the galaxy that had evolved not just to survive harsh environments, but to thrive in them. They were the only civilization that treated impossible as a personal challenge. They were the only race that, when faced with a system designed to break them, would instead sit down and figure out how to break the system. On day 97, Marcus finished his project. He'd spent weeks carefully mapping the dimensional barriers' resonance frequencies, identifying the exact points where reality was thinnest. Using components jury-rigged from his survival kit and materials synthesized from the zone's own hostile environment, he'd built something that shouldn't have been possible. A door. The Galactic Council was in session when reality tore open, in the center of their chamber. Delegates screamed and scrambled for cover as a perfectly circular portal materialized above their heads. Through it stepped Commander Marcus Chen, looking refreshed and remarkably well-fed. "Miss me," he called, cheerfully brushing interdimensional dust off his uniform. The Zephyrian judge's tentacles went rigid with shock. "Impossible. Zone Omega is inescapable. The dimensional barriers." "Oh, those?" Marcus pulled out a small notebook filled with equations. "Yeah, took me about 6 weeks to map the resonance patterns. Turns out your inescapable prison has the same basic structure as a standard quantum containment field. We use those to store antimatter on Earth. Kids learn to hack them in high school physics class." He looked around at the stunned faces of the galactic community's most powerful beings. "By the way, I've been documenting everything in there. Fascinating place. I've written a complete technical manual for Zone Omega. I'm thinking of publishing. It is a vacation guide. Extreme Camping, your guide to dimensional prison escapes." The Krillian ambassador's mandibles chattered in disbelief. The torments, the psychological pressure. "Oh, that was fun too," Marcus grinned. "Really helped me work through some old issues. Nothing like a few months of forced introspection. To give you perspective, I actually feel great." He pulled out another device and tossed it casually onto the chamber floor. "I also took the liberty of installing a few upgrades while I was there. Zone Omega now has Wi-Fi, a coffee dispensary, and a small library. Oh, and I may have accidentally left the dimensional door open. Hope nobody minds if other prisoners start wandering out." They seemed nice enough. The chamber erupted in chaos as alarms began blaring. Emergency reports flooded in. Zone Omega was experiencing massive containment failures. Prisoners were emerging across the galaxy, most of them confused, but surprisingly, well-rested and educated. Apparently, Marcus had turned the galaxy's most feared prison into something resembling a wellness retreat. "How?" the ethereal representative whispered, its energy field flickering with bewilderment. Marcus straightened his uniform and smiled that same infuriating human smile. "You tried to break me with your worst nightmare. Problem is, we humans don't break. We adapt. We overcome. We turn your doomsday weapons into tourist attractions and your ultimate punishments into learning experiences." He started walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and next time you want to get rid of a human, maybe try asking nicely first. We're actually pretty reasonable when you're not being space racist about it." The door closed behind him, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. Outside in the corridor, Marcus activated his communicator. "Chen to Enterprise. Mission accomplished. And hey, who's up for poker tonight? I learned some great new games in prison.